one way or another.
We're here with John Long, a longtime filmmaker, producer, and director, and one of the men behind the documentary of January 6th, the 2020 insurrection, that is titled Fight Like Hell, of which I am very excited to dive into and discuss. But first, I do want to thank you very much for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. The pleasure's all ours. So before we dive into a few of the clips that I thought were compelling to speak on, could you explain maybe what led to you fanning these cameras out, trying to get the images that you did? Did you have like the sense or idea that it would turn out to be what it was?
We didn't know what was going to happen, and it turns out, all those different times I wanted to go, the one we picked was the good one to go film. And luckily, because the type of stuff that we generally shoot, we use cinema cameras, like really high-end red cinema cameras. So we were getting different imagery than the thousands of iPhones, and there's a few other cameras there, but the type of imagery we got, and especially because one of the cinematographers is used to being in combat zones, for him it was like like a yoga class or something. Yeah. He was just composing pictures and trying to get the best picture possible. And so the images we got, I believe, and you'll see when you show it to your viewers, they're much different than anything you've seen. So it's kind of interesting to release this thing 4 years later and be able to say, we're going to show you pictures like you've never seen before, because people have seen so much. Mm-hmm. And so, we start out with this one shot of the Capitol Police officer's knuckles, and it's just focused on his hand, and then it evolves. And right then you go, okay, this is different than anything I've seen. So yeah, that's sort of how it came about.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's some of the best works, or the spontaneous ones, are the ones you don't really prepare for to that extent, say. I did want to ask about the first clip that we're going to discuss, which was actually from the night before January 6th, on January 5th. I noticed two things when I was watching over it. One was the rhetoric towards the cops was very like degrading, hateful, even violent or threatening at times.
All hell is going to break loose tomorrow. It's not going to happen like you think it's going to happen. Okay, it's going to be quite extraordinarily different. And all I can say is strap in. You have made this happen, and tomorrow it's game day.
Get the fuck out of here! That's right. And you know what? Your blood loss can matter anywhere else.
Could you speak to like what you caught on this night, the overall feeling of the gathering crowd, and also maybe to what it speaks to the idea that January 6th was spontaneous or unplanned?
Yeah, so I mean, January 5th, there were speeches in Freedom Plaza all day long. They lasted over the course of, I think, almost 8 hours. And then they ended, I don't know, somewhere around 9 or 10 in the evening. And they were, whipping up the crowds, and, they were definitely heated speeches. And after that ended, a kind of a group of people who didn't go back to their hotel rooms and whatever, just stayed out on the streets. And they made their way over to BLM Plaza and sort of had a standoff with the cops there. And in that scene, you see, there's so much animosity and so much violence and violent rhetorics towards the police officers, which really shows that this was not it wasn't necessarily spontaneous what was coming the day before. In fact, they even said, you can't stop what's coming tomorrow. So, this was a small group of individuals who were obviously up late at night. So it's that specific type of group that would be in that scenario anyway. Not all people were like that. But it just showed that there was a lot of this angry and violence kind of baked in, and what happened the next day felt like something was going to happen.
Yeah, kind of a culmination of the rhetoric or the angering and growing of the group, so to speak. And the next clip that I wanted to speak about was actually, I believe, was you showing never before seen clips of the mob and the things that were happening on the day of the riot, you know, whatever word people want to use for it, at the Capitol. And as you spoke to at the beginning, or it might have been before we hopped on, I believe these were from a professional combat film guy. So like, again, kind of his norm, he was able to get maybe better angles than other people could have, which I think it's important to juxtapose what you see in this clip with this idea that it was like a peaceful protest, which, you know, unless my eyes deceive me from this clip, it didn't look that peaceful, at least speaking of the people who were at the Capitol. Can you talk about not just this clip, but overall what the film captured happening on the day of?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff that we've seen in the media is these short clips, right? From iPhones and stuff. So they last like a couple seconds per shot, right? And what's interesting about the way we shot, because they're professional cinematographers, and they're really focusing on the shot, we play a lot of shots very long in the film. So you see the context, you see the people, you see things develop. And it's like a picture says 1,000 words, right? You have all these narrative medias narratives in the media about, you know, that it was peaceful or that the cops were waving them in or these types of things. And those things could be true as well. Like those can happen on the same day. But, you know, this imagery really shows in context how the breaches happened with the police officers.
Yeah, I think it helps paint a picture because you have some of the clips that show like from cell phones and stuff of like the breaking down of the barricades, the breaking down of the doors, the breaking in, and then in the clips that you show, or the ones that I saw at least, was more like head-on clashes with law enforcement and that kinds of thing. Were there lots of clips like this that you guys were able to get in your time?
Oh yeah, I mean we were filming all day, and yeah, like for example, one of the shots we got, like when Trump was still speaking at the Ellipse, there's a group of Trump supporters and Proud Boys who breached the Capitol while he was still speaking. So my cinematographer filmed, basically there was 3 fences. So there's one at the sidewalk, one about 50 meters up from the sidewalk where there was a couple bike racks with 5 cops standing there. And then there's another group of fences right at the foot of the Capitol. So when the first perimeter fence at the sidewalk was breached, it took only 5 minutes for this crowd, which is thousands of people, it looks like tens of thousands of people, to get from the sidewalk outside the Capitol to the foot of the Capitol. And my cinematographer filmed it in one take. So it's a 5-minute take. So there's no, and that hasn't been released. I actually cut it up a little bit in the film. Most of it, of that 5 minutes, is in the film, but I did cut away a few times, but it exists as one shot, and no one's ever seen that type of footage. And because he was so comfortable in that scenario, because he's used to being in a combat zone, he's composing all the time. Whereas, you know, a lot of other people, they're like, it's a frantic, you know, crazy, chaotic scene, and they're getting bumped around. And his mission is like, I'm just trying to compose a beautiful picture the whole time. So that's why it looks so much different than anything you've seen.
There's some beauty to be found in chaos, right? I'm glad you brought up the Proud Boys, because the next clip that I want to go over, or a couple clips maybe, was it showed their involvement, them marching, probably some of the things you were talking about as well, which of course the Proud Boys were their leaders. Multiple of their leaders have been arrested for seditious conspiracy for their involvement. We know that they were there, and they've been described as everything from far right to like white supremacist and neo-Nazi.
The whole group right here. Turn around, take some photos from the Capitol.
So I'm kind of curious, could you talk or speak about what your camera caught of their involvement? Like what kind of role or part did they play in it?
So because we went there last minute, we didn't have press credentials to go in and film at the Ellipse. So, my two cameramen showed up to try to get in, but they wouldn't let them in because they had the metal detectors, even though President Trump was saying, "Oh, let them in anyway." Yeah. They kept out. So they didn't stick around to film from a distance the speeches at the Ellipse. So they just kind of made their way over to the National Mall. When they got to the National Mall, Trump hadn't even started speaking yet. There's like a congregation of Proud Boys, hundreds of Proud Boys there, because they're not sitting around watching speeches either. So they're kind of doing this march all the way down the Capitol Mall towards the Capitol between around between 11 and 12 or something while Trump is speaking. And our camera men were with them the whole time. So that was really fascinating to just capture them on their own. These kind of haunting images of a couple hundred Proud Boys walking towards the Capitol. Then they get to the perimeter fence at the Capitol and meet up with a lot of Trump supporters that are already there. And they all breach all three of those perimeter fences while Trump is still speaking at the Ellipse. So again, it's another kind of indication that all of this was kind of baked in, like people were ready to go. And there was over 100,000 people in DC, and there's probably only a couple thousand that actually breached and went in the Capitol. So there was a lot of people who were there for a peaceful protest as well. So we like to show that context as well, because a lot of times the way people frame it is it's just one monolith. It's like the Trump supporters are the insurrectionists or whatever, where a lot of them are there for a peaceful protest, and some of them are there to be violent.
Yeah, that's something I speak about on my channel a lot. I think it's important to understand that there was definitely players who knew or had an idea or wanted this to go on the way it did, and were kind of like turning the cogs in the machine. But then there was a lot of people just kind of were there in the moment, and either, I'm sure some of them went along with it, and I'm sure plenty of them said, "This is too much for me." I mean, there's clips of people that went, like I think Ray Epps comes to mind as one popular figure you hear, where he's there, and then they all go to the Capitol, and then you can see him like trying to stop people. So I'm sure there were like lots of people like, "Whoa, I did not expect this to happen to this level."
Yeah, and in those scenarios too, like people might do things that they would never have planned to do or never even consider doing, and then they get caught up in that, what's happening. Something similar happened in Vancouver, where I live, when in the end of the NHL season, when the Vancouver Canucks lost, there was a huge riot in Vancouver, and that same kind of mob mentality happened there. And these are just normal people who got caught up in it. So it's such a diverse group of people. There's people there who plan to go there and maybe be violent. There's people who got caught up in it and just might have gone over doing things that they never would have expected to do. And there is peaceful people. So you kind of have to acknowledge that there's all of these different things happening, and it's a really chaotic scene.
Yeah, one more point on that. One of the more interesting interviews I've done was actually with one of the sweetest old ladies I've ever talked to. She was like 70 or 80 years old, and she realized, I guess, the error of her ways, so to speak. But she was at the Capitol, and she was one of those people where she didn't know any of that was going to happen, but then it went down, and she was kind of like, well, I guess I'm just going to go with the crowd, go with the flow. And then, one thing led to another, and she's like in the Capitol doing all these things. She detailed to me, and she's like, I never would have imagined that I would do any of that, but when you're there and you see tons of people doing it, you kind of just get carried away.
Yeah, exactly. Then did she get charged with anything, or?
I know that she got charged. I don't know if she
Yeah.
ended up getting I don't remember. I'll put the
Yeah.
interview up, for people if they want to go. I don't remember. It's been a while since I spoke to her, but she did
Yeah.
initially get charged, but I don't remember if she like got off or whatnot.
Right.
But so the last clip that I wanted to discuss and show for people is from the second MAGA march, and
Yeah.
as a slew of, frankly, in my opinion, horrendous people speaking, mobilizing these movements kind of, but it's figures like, Alex Jones, Nick Fuentes, Ali Alexander, people who kind of have a history of doing things like this.
What is happening right now is a spiritual war for the soul of this country. It is a spiritual war between Satan and evil, and between us, the children of Jesus Christ. This is a Christian nation, and the Christians in this country demand that we have Christian leaders governing this country. Yeah! And we will no longer accept any less. From now on, I identify not as a Republican. I identify as a Trump supporter.
So I don't know who's going to the White House in 38 days, but I sure know this. Joe Biden is a globalist, and Joe Biden will be removed one way or another.
Could you talk to the importance of the larger movement of clips like this, of people mobilizing others and that kind of thing?
Yeah. So, after we finished filming that, we started to decide if we wanted to make a film or what this was going to look like. And I ended up collaborating with some other journalists and filmmakers who had been covering the Stop the Steal movement from the beginning. So right basically at election day, and then they started mobilizing the day afterwards. And Ali Alexander was a big part of organizing that, like he was the lead organizer. So the film, the first, third of the film shows the time between November 2nd and January 5th, and shows all these events leading up, and the key players who are mobilizing people to get to DC and amplifying that the election was stolen. And there was a massive amount, it kind of became a movement, and there was a massive amount of energy and people in DC for those MAGA marches. So, some of the key figures who are giving speeches were Alex Jones, like you say, and Nick Fuentes, Michael Flynn, and Ali Alexander. And, in the case of Ali, Alex, and Nick, they were, together a lot, collaborating or doing speeches in other cities like in Georgia. So you see them working together in the lead up to January 6th. And it just helps people understand what was going on the ground, kind of not behind the scenes because it was out in public, but behind the scenes in the sense that the mainstream media was not covering that story. And Ali even says in the film, he says, the mainstream media is only covering 10% of what we're doing. So this film, we really wanted to show that. And I also want to point out that the way we created this film, we didn't want to use after the fact interviews where experts are coming in and giving their opinions or telling you what they think or what happened. The entire film happens observationally. So you're at the place in the moment watching it unfold. So there's a very cohesive narrative. Like there's a story with a beginning, middle, and end, and a transformation at the end, but it's without having a narrator or interviews of people telling you, leading you through the story. It's all on the ground.
And I think that makes a perfect segue to what the last question I wanted to ask you was, with this releasing during an election year, with the election ramping up, whether by, of course, happenstance or purposefully, or, however it ended up happening, but with it being, in the spirit of another election with Donald Trump, a lot of the same players from this movement being involved, what do you hope that people can take from, I guess, specifically your documentary, or even just documentaries like yours?
Well, I mean, I hope people come away with, watching it and realizing that the political violence is just, it's not acceptable. And also an understanding, I'm hoping that people see it and maybe in a different light than they would have before, because there's not this kind of counter narrative all the time where there's a pointing finger at you're woke or you're MAGA or whatever. There's none of that in there. It's just on the ground. So, a transformation happened on January 6th after Trump told everybody to go home. You had most people on the evening of January 6th saying, we're better than this. We can't let this violence happen. We need a peaceful transfer of power. We need to be able to disagree respectfully. And there's a woman that we interviewed, a Trump supporter, at the end, who's just so eloquent the way she says it. It's just like, I don't know how we got to this place, and I don't know how to fix it. What I can do as a person, but we just need to figure a way to come together. So I'm hoping that people will look at this and come away with that. But I think, everybody's going to have their own interpretation when they see it, and there'll be a lot of different, responses for sure.
Yeah, well, again, I want to thank you for taking time to talk to us about your film. It's Fight Like Hell. It's available on YouTube. I'll have a link for it in the description if anybody does want to check it out. But yeah, I appreciate you for speaking with us and all your hard work on getting this out there.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the chat.
Yeah, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.